Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. On the evening of May 28, 2023, in the small Italian town of Senago, 29-year-old Giulia Tramontano vanished without a trace. 7 months pregnant, she stopped responding to calls and messages from loved ones, and her phone suddenly went silent. The first person to report her disappearance was the man she lived with, Alessandro Impallantone. He insisted that when he returned home from work, he found the apartment empty and had no idea where his partner could have gone. From the very beginning, there were too many unusual details in this case. Giulia had left behind most of her personal belongings, and her plans for the near future gave no indication that she intended to disappear. As investigators began piecing together her last known activities, they uncovered even more troubling facts. The night before she went missing, Giulia had sent messages to her mother, Loredana, and a close friend, revealing that she had a serious argument with Alessandro. She was deeply upset and wrote that the situation was causing her a great deal of distress. But the most important question remained unanswered. What really happened that fateful evening? And if Giulia had truly left the house on her own, why had no one seen her since? In the days that followed, investigators would begin unraveling a web of deception that would lead to a grim truth. Giulia Tramontano was born on May 2, 1994, in the small town of Sant'Antimo, located in the Naples province. She grew up in a close-knit family where support and warmth were always present. Her parents encouraged independence and self-confidence from an early age. While they embraced modern views, family traditions remained a cornerstone of their lives, and home was always a place she could return to for guidance and comfort. Giulia attended a local school, excelling in the humanities. She was drawn to real estate, fascinated by architecture, investment opportunities, and the idea of becoming a successful real estate agent. After high school, she pursued a degree in the field, quickly mastering the profession thanks to her analytical mindset and strong communication skills. By the age of 25, she had built a solid reputation in the industry. But for Giulia, this wasn't enough. She dreamed of life in a big city filled with opportunities. By the time she turned 26, her career in her hometown had reached a plateau. Working at a real estate agency, she realized the local market had its limitations. Inspired by stories from friends, she made the decision to move to Milan, a city she believed would offer her a new chapter filled with potential. By the end of 2020, her decision was final. Milan symbolized independence, new connections, and the career growth she longed for. The transition happened quickly. Packing her belongings and saying goodbye to her loved ones, she set off for the city that she hoped would become her new home. After moving to Milan, Giulia immediately immersed herself in work. The city's real estate market was fast-paced, competitive, and required confidence and persistence. She adapted quickly, building connections, attending networking events, and closing deals. Her new life was exciting, but amid her busy schedule, she found herself longing for something more: personal happiness. It was during this time that she met Alessandro Impallantone. Their paths crossed at a Milan bar where her colleagues had invited her to celebrate a successful deal. Alessandro worked as a bartender at a high-end lounge inside a 5-star hotel. A year older than Giulia, he was charming, outgoing, and had a natural ability to connect with people. His confidence and charisma drew her in. With him, she felt like she could relax, momentarily escape the pressures of work, and simply enjoy the present. The first few weeks of their relationship felt effortless. They spent evenings dining at restaurants, strolling through the city at night, and talking about the future. Alessandro shared that he had a son from a previous relationship, but assured her that his past was behind him and that he was now looking for stability. Giulia believed she had finally met someone with whom she could build a lasting relationship. Their romance moved quickly, and within a few months, they decided to move in together. Giulia sincerely hoped that her move to Milan would bring not only career growth, but also personal fulfillment. She was convinced that Alessandro was the person she was meant to build a future with. But at the time, she had no idea what secrets he was hiding, or how much her decision would change the course of her life. Alessandro Impallantone was born in 1993. Despite the confident image he projected, his life in Milan was far from stable. Working as a bartender at an exclusive venue, he was constantly surrounded by wealthy clients, successful business people, and celebrities. This allowed him to carefully craft the persona of a man accustomed to luxury. He was skilled at making people feel at ease, quick to form connections, and a master of persuasion, always hiding his true intentions behind charm and an easygoing nature. His job at the bar provided not only a steady income, but also valuable social ties. He knew how to present himself in the best possible light, creating the illusion of a man striving for more. His colleagues saw him as charismatic yet somewhat superficial, someone who never truly opened up but maintained the appearance of a fun, carefree personality. To clients and acquaintances, he seemed to be living the dream. But behind this carefully curated image, there was much more that remained unseen. When he first started dating Giulia, there were no apparent red flags. On the contrary, in the early stages of their relationship, he appeared attentive and caring. He knew exactly what to say and how to make a good impression. But over time, Alessandro's true nature began to emerge. Over time, problems began to surface in their relationship. The first warning signs appeared soon after they moved in together. Alessandro often joked around with Giulia, but his teasing gradually became more cutting. He would comment on her accent, hinting that people from southern Italy were different from northerners in a way that wasn't exactly flattering. He openly mocked her favorite soccer team, knowing how much it meant to her. At first, Giulia brushed it off, thinking it was just harmless teasing. But as time went on, it became clear that there was something more behind his words. Their arguments became more frequent. Alessandro grew irritated over small things. How she organized their home, how she reacted to his words, how she answered his questions. He would abruptly cut off conversations or ignore her altogether, making her feel like she was the one in the wrong. In those moments, he became cold and distant, only to suddenly switch back to his usual self as if nothing had happened. This emotional roller coaster became their new normal. One day, he would be affectionate and attentive. The next, completely indifferent. Giulia tried to understand what was happening, but she never got any clear answers. Alessandro never spoke openly about his feelings, leaving her in a constant state of uncertainty. But the biggest deception, the one she never saw coming, was his double life. Giulia believed that when Alessandro left for work, he was spending his nights behind the bar. But in reality, he had been living a lie for months. Not long after they moved in together, he started seeing another woman, Allegra. He met Allegra at work. She was younger, multilingual, and building a career in the hospitality industry. Alessandro presented himself as a single man who had ended things with Giulia long ago, but was still living with her due to temporary circumstances. He skillfully maintained this illusion, assuring Allegra that Giulia was already looking for a new apartment and would be moving out soon. Neither Giulia nor Allegra had any idea the other existed. To each of them, he played a different role, weaving his lies so seamlessly that nothing seemed suspicious. With one, he talked about the future. With the other, he lived in the moment, never once considering that his deception might come crashing down. Meanwhile, tensions in his relationship with Giulia continued to build. She sensed that something was off but couldn't quite figure out what it was. As time passed, the unease grew, yet Alessandro kept up his double act, unaware that the truth was closing in on him. By the end of 2022, Giulia started noticing changes in her body. Persistent fatigue, unusual cravings, and a missed cycle made her suspect something was different. Not wanting to wait, she bought a pregnancy test. When she saw 2 clear lines appear, the realization hit her. She was expecting a child. The news brought mixed emotions. On one hand, she had always dreamed of having a family. On the other, the last few months with Alessandro had been difficult. Still, she knew she had to tell him in person. Choosing the right moment, Giulia nervously shared the news. She had imagined a range of possible reactions: shock, happiness, maybe even a little fear, but Alessandro's face remained unreadable. He was silent for several seconds before asking just one question. "Are you sure?" Giulia felt a chilling distance in his demeanor. He showed no curiosity, asked no questions about how far along she was or how she was feeling. His indifference was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, He never brought up the topic again. No discussions about the future, no interest in upcoming doctor's visits. Giulia felt abandoned but held on to hope that, in time, he would come to terms with the situation and start showing some level of support. The new year began, but Alessandro's attitude remained unchanged. More and more, Giulia found herself spending evenings alone, contemplating her future. She kept working, trying to focus on other things, but an uneasy feeling grew inside her. Meanwhile, Alessandro's double life took an unexpected turn. In early 2023, he learned that his other partner, Allegra, was also expecting. The news caught him completely off guard. Just like Giulia, Allegra had no idea another woman was in the picture. She truly believed she and Alessandro were in a committed relationship. Unlike Giulia, however, Allegra was unsure whether she wanted to continue the pregnancy. Realizing that his carefully constructed deception was falling apart, Alessandro convinced Allegra that having a child wasn't the right decision at that moment. He assured her that he would support whatever choice she made, but strongly implied that ending the pregnancy would be for the best. Allegra hesitated for a long time, but eventually agreed. Alessandro accompanied her to the medical procedure, ensuring that this chapter was closed. He hoped that, with Allegra's pregnancy no longer an issue, he could now focus on dealing with what he saw as his bigger problem: Giulia's decision to have the baby. But unlike Allegra, Giulia was determined to continue her pregnancy, despite his emotional distance. He repeatedly tried to persuade her to reconsider, but Giulia refused to change her mind. For her, this was a conscious and personal decision. She knew that her relationship with Alessandro was falling apart, but she was prepared to raise the baby on her own. What she didn't realize was that this choice would become the turning point of her fate. After Giulia refused to terminate the pregnancy, Alessandro realized he was losing control of the situation. Her firm decision disrupted his plans and forced him to look for another way to free himself from what he saw as a problem. By the end of 2022, he had begun systematically researching poisons. He scoured the internet for ways to cause harm without raising suspicion, analyzing which substances were both effective and difficult to detect. His research covered chemical compounds found in household products, plant-based toxins, and even highly dangerous substances like ricin and cyanide. However, most of the options he found were either too difficult to obtain or left clear traces in the body. Eventually, he settled on rodenticides, products designed to eliminate rodents. These were widely available over the counter and wouldn't raise any red flags. He also found information suggesting that certain types worked slowly, causing internal bleeding, weakness, and anemia, symptoms that could easily be mistaken for pregnancy complications. By early 2023, Alessandro began putting his plan into action. He started adding small amounts of the toxic substance to Giulia's food and drinks, hoping that her health would gradually decline. Within weeks, she began experiencing unusual symptoms: constant exhaustion, dizziness, nausea, and sharp abdominal pain. Giulia confided in her friends about how unwell she felt, but assumed it was just part of the pregnancy. She had no idea that something much more sinister was happening. Alessandro closely monitored her condition, expecting the effects to intensify, but the poison wasn't working as quickly as he had hoped. Frustrated, he continued searching for ways to increase its potency, but the results remained disappointing. Giulia still felt sick, but her body was fighting back, and the pregnancy was progressing. This infuriated Alessandro. His original plan had failed, and now he was forced to consider another way out. Alessandro was used to being in control. He carefully crafted his lies, knowing exactly what to say and how to convince each woman of his version of reality. Giulia believed he was simply going through a difficult phase and that, in time, he would come around to accepting the pregnancy. Allegra, on the other hand, was certain that his past relationship had ended long ago, but one wrong move shattered his carefully constructed illusion. The first red flag for Allegra was how uneasy Alessandro became whenever the topic of his past came up. He avoided discussing his life before they met, never shared his social media, and made no mention of his ex. At first, it didn't seem suspicious, but over time, inconsistencies started piling up. The real turning point came when she accidentally saw photos on his phone, recent pictures of him with Giulia. The way they looked at each other, the closeness between them, it was clear that their relationship was far from over. Allegra didn't want to jump to conclusions. Instead, she started paying closer attention, taking mental notes. He often left in the evenings, claiming he was working late, yet his coworkers at the hotel mentioned that he had clocked out early. Sometimes he wouldn't answer his phone, later coming up with excuses that didn't quite add up. When Allegra finally confronted him about the photos, Alessandro didn't miss a beat. His reaction was instant. He claimed Giulia couldn't accept their breakup and was deliberately spreading those pictures to manipulate him with guilt. Allegra wanted to believe him, but something about his explanation felt off. She started asking more questions, and his responses became increasingly unconvincing. Sensing he was losing control, Alessandro abruptly changed tactics. He claimed Giulia wasn't just refusing to move on, she had actually faked her pregnancy in a desperate attempt to hold on to him. Now he was trying to convince Allegra that there was no baby at all, but his desperation only fueled her suspicions. In a final attempt to solidify his lie, Alessandro went so far as to fabricate a DNA test. He altered a file he had downloaded online, presenting it as proof that he had no connection to the child. Allegra initially accepted this version of events, but her doubts lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more she didn't know. A few days later, she decided to find out for herself. While Alessandro was asleep, she took his phone, found Giulia's number, and sent her a message. The reply came almost instantly. Giulia didn't sound like a woman consumed by revenge. On the contrary, she also wanted answers. The next day, Allegra suggested they meet in person. Both women understood that this conversation would change everything. Their meeting took place at the hotel where Allegra worked. They had agreed on a time in advance, both feeling a mix of tension and determination. Allegra still didn't know the full extent of Alessandro's deception, and Giulia couldn't believe that the man she had planned a future with had been leading a double life. The conversation started cautiously. Allegra spoke first, sharing what she had discovered. She told Giulia how Alessandro had assured her that his past relationship was completely over. Then, she mentioned the so-called DNA test that supposedly proved the baby wasn't his. Giulia listened carefully. When Allegra finished speaking, she calmly stated that the test was fake. She had never suggested any kind of testing, and the timeline of her pregnancy aligned perfectly with their relationship. More importantly, she revealed that she and Alessandro were still living together, and at no point had he given her any reason to believe their relationship was over. With every passing minute, Allegra saw the situation more clearly. She had been deceived from the very beginning. Her entire perception of their relationship shifted, and for the first time, she had no doubts about the truth. Hurt and disappointment washed over her, but she felt no resentment toward Giulia. Instead, it became painfully obvious that they had both fallen victim to the same web of lies. Their conversation lasted over an hour. The two women compared details, piecing together the full picture of Alessandro's deception. By the end, they no longer saw each other as rivals. What emerged instead was an unexpected sense of solidarity. At that moment, Giulia made her final decision. She was done. She had no intention of staying with a man who had manipulated her feelings while hiding a second life. Her future belonged to her and her child, and Alessandro had no place in it. When she returned home, she didn't wait for the right moment. She confronted Alessandro immediately, telling him she knew everything and that their relationship was over. His reaction was exactly as expected. First, he denied everything, then he turned defensive, accusing her of digging into his personal life. But Giulia wasn't listening to his excuses. She firmly told him that she was leaving for Naples and wanted nothing more to do with him. That evening, she texted her mother and sister explaining her decision. They supported her fully, offering to help in any way they could. Giulia reassured them, saying she needed to take care of a few things in Milan first, but would be home in a few days. She didn't know that night would be her last. After their conversation, Alessandro realized he had lost control. Everything he had hidden was now exposed. Giulia knew the truth about his double life, his lies, and his manipulation. She no longer believed him, no longer listened to him, and had made a firm decision to leave. Her calmness infuriated him. He couldn't understand how he had ended up in a situation where his deception had been uncovered, leaving him powerless. He felt himself losing not just his control over Giulia, but also his carefully crafted image. If she told anyone else, his entire life could come crashing down. That day, the tension between them reached its breaking point. Giulia ignored all of Alessandro's attempts to speak. She continued packing her things, showing no emotion. Her silence only made him angrier. Alessandro tried to convince her that she was making a mistake, that he loved her, that she needed to reconsider. But Giulia didn't respond. His frustration grew. He raised his voice, desperate to get a reaction, but she refused to argue. When he realized her decision was final, uncontrollable rage took over. He grabbed a knife from the counter, and in a blind fury, he struck. Giulia didn't have time to react. The attack was sudden, precise, but it wasn't enough for him to stop. He kept going, driven by panic and fear of exposure. He lost all sense of restraint, 37 stab wounds. Alessandro stood over her body, staring at the reality of what he had just done. Now, he needed to get rid of the evidence. He couldn't leave things as they were. He knew blood left traces. He understood that simply hiding the body wouldn't be enough. He dragged her to the bathroom, doused her with alcohol, and set her on fire, hoping it would erase the evidence. But the flames didn't do what he expected. The fire left burns but didn't destroy the remains. Panic set in. He had no plan. He grabbed rags, cleaning supplies, and started scrubbing the blood from the floor, the walls, the furniture. He scrubbed and scrubbed, but the stains wouldn't completely disappear. The apartment still looked like a crime scene. He realized he wouldn't be able to erase all traces of what had happened. But despite that, he was convinced he could find a way to escape responsibility. He didn't yet know that investigators would soon piece together every clue and expose his guilt. Once Alessandro fully grasped what he had done, with Giulia's body lying in the bathroom, his first instinct was to cover his tracks. He had already tried to burn the evidence, but when that failed, he needed another plan. The first step was to stage her disappearance. He decided to make it look like Giulia had left voluntarily. To do this, he took her phone and began sending messages to her family and friends. He knew they would worry if she suddenly vanished, so he had to create the illusion that she had chosen to leave on her own. He texted her mother, saying she needed some time alone. The message was short and vague, just enough to avoid raising suspicion. Then he messaged one of Giulia's friends, claiming that she had left but wasn't ready to talk about where she was going. He was hoping to buy himself time, to make it seem like she had simply decided to disappear. However, his plan didn't end there. He knew that sooner or later someone would raise the alarm. So just hours after the crime, he went to the police himself and reported Giulia missing. He claimed that she had left home after an argument and never returned. His version was simple. That morning, he had gone to work, and when he came back, she was gone. He deliberately added details to make his story sound convincing. He told officers that her personal belongings, passport, and money were missing too, suggesting that she might have left town on her own. Investigators listened carefully, but from the start, something felt off. His demeanor raised suspicion. He spoke too confidently, as if he already knew what questions would be asked. Unlike Giulia's family and friends who were panicked and desperate for answers, he remained unnervingly calm. While the police launched a search, Alessandro focused on hiding the evidence. At first, he left her remains in the bathroom but knew he couldn't keep them there for long. He wrapped them in plastic and, under the cover of night, carried them to the garage. Over the next few days, he moved the remains multiple times. First, he hid them in the basement of their building, then returned them to the garage. He was trying to figure out a way to dispose of them permanently, but the longer he delayed, the more mistakes he made. Investigators began scrutinizing his statements, questioning neighbors and looking for inconsistencies. While he believed he was still in control, law enforcement was already closing in on him. After Alessandro reported Giulia missing, the police followed standard procedures for a disappearance case. But the first major clue came when forensic specialists detected traces of blood in his car. Despite his efforts to clean it, modern forensic technology allowed investigators to identify biological evidence. A rapid analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Giulia. The second piece of evidence was found in the common areas of their apartment building. On the stairs and in the hallway, there were faint reddish stains that initially looked like dust or spilled liquid. However, chemical testing revealed they were traces of partially cleaned blood. Investigators also noted Alessandro's unusual behavior. Unlike most people whose loved ones disappear, he didn't display genuine concern. He didn't reach out to Giulia's family asking for help in finding her, nor did he actively participate in spreading information about her disappearance. He simply followed the formal steps required to report someone missing. Nothing more, which raised further suspicion. A key breakthrough in the case came when detectives examined his electronic devices. They seized his phone, computer, and tablet. What they found was shocking. First, they uncovered search history dating back months before the crime. He had looked up information on poisons, researched the effects of different toxins, and read articles on how to discreetly harm someone. There were even searches questioning why certain toxic substances might not work as expected. Another critical piece of evidence was the forged DNA test he had shown Allegra. A forensic examination confirmed that the document had been altered, and the file itself had been downloaded from a website that allowed users to edit medical records. The mounting evidence was closing in on Alessandro. His version of events was falling apart. Investigators intensified their pressure, pointing out inconsistencies one by one. At first, he stuck to his story, insisting he knew nothing. But with each interrogation, police presented more facts he couldn't escape from. They showed him photos of the bloodstains, confronted him with his own search history, and brought in witnesses who had heard loud noises and shouting from their apartment. A key breakthrough in the investigation came when authorities analyzed Alessandro's movements in the days following Giulia's disappearance. Surveillance footage revealed that in the days after she was reported missing, he made multiple trips to the garage, carrying bags inside and later returning empty-handed. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Alessandro's story began to unravel. Eventually, he broke down and revealed the location where he had hidden her remains. On June 1, 2023, police discovered Giulia's body in an overgrown area near Senago. Forensic analysis confirmed that an attempt had been made to burn the remains, but the process had been interrupted. Despite his efforts to cover his tracks, experts were able to determine the cause of death and gather definitive evidence linking him to the crime. The revelation of Giulia Tramontano's tragic fate sent shockwaves across Italy. In a country where cases of gender-based crimes have long been a serious concern, her case became another painful reminder of the dangers posed by individuals who hide behind the mask of a caring partner. Following Alessandro Impallantone's arrest, protests erupted across the country. Women took to the streets holding signs and demanding stricter penalties for crimes rooted in domestic aggression. Memorial marches were held in Milan, Naples, Rome, and other cities, with calls for systemic reforms to better protect those at risk. At one of the rallies, Giulia's sister, Giulia Tramontano, spoke out, urging lawmakers to take action against the alarming frequency of cases where individuals face no real consequences until it is too late. Meanwhile, forensic experts and investigators worked to understand the psychological profile of the perpetrator. Alessandro underwent a psychological evaluation, which revealed concerning behavioral traits. Court-appointed psychiatrists concluded that he displayed strong narcissistic tendencies. He showed no remorse for his actions, and his behavior during interrogations and court proceedings reflected deep-seated egocentrism and a complete lack of empathy. He viewed others solely through the lens of his own self-interest, disregarding their emotions and experiences. His actions were driven entirely by a desire to protect his own reputation and maintain control over those around him. Any loss of power triggered an immediate and dangerous response. During the trial, Alessandro attempted to appear remorseful, but his words failed to convince either Giulia's family or the public. He claimed he didn't understand how he could have done something so terrible, insisting it was a moment of impulsive rage, something he hadn't fully realized he was doing. However, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence. His online searches about poisons, the attempted poisoning, the falsified DNA test, and the false report he made to the police. Each of these facts proved that the crime was premeditated. Following Alessandro's arrest and exposure, Allegra cooperated with authorities. She handed over her messages with him, which showed that he had deceived both her and Giulia. She also testified about the fake DNA test and his repeated attempts to manipulate her. During the trial, Allegra appeared as a witness. Prosecutors called her to confirm key details: how Alessandro had hidden his double life, how he had lied about Giulia's pregnancy, and the excuses he made when the truth began to unravel. According to those in the courtroom, Allegra looked deeply shaken. She realized that if she hadn't accidentally found those photos on his phone, the truth might have come to light too late. During her testimony, she spoke about the guilt she felt toward Giulia, even though she understood she had also been a victim of his deception. After the trial, Allegra refused to speak with journalists, avoided the public eye, and tried to distance herself from the tragedy. Reports indicated that she later left Milan and moved to another city, hoping to rebuild her life far from the memories tied to this case. The court found Alessandro guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. These included the cruelty of the crime, the prolonged emotional mistreatment of the victim, and his deliberate efforts to destroy evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison. In the judge's final statement, it was emphasized that crimes like this could not be excused as moments of lost control or temporary emotional distress. Alessandro's actions over several months demonstrated a clear and deliberate intent to get rid of Giulia. Her case became a tragic reminder of the dangers posed by individuals who view their partners as possessions. But Giulia's story did not go unnoticed. It sparked outrage and became part of a broader movement to protect those who could still be saved. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.